they preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth. They are the focus of evil in the modern world.
In the early 80s, that focus of evil was on the Soviet Union and its Red Army. Football's most sinister empire was the Silver and Black, led by Al Davis.
Unfortunately, and I think quite unfairly, the public perception of Mr. Al Davis, who is the owner of the Oakland Raiders, paints the man as an avaricious creep of questionable integrity and having no ethics, and also who is a heretic who has, possibly with satanic help, publicly expressed doubt as to the divine origin of all the words uttered by Mr. Pete Rozelle.
Davis was fighting a not-so-cold war with Commissioner Pete Rozelle and the National Football League.
I spent a long time in Oakland. I had a commitment to excellence.
Davis wanted to move his franchise from Oakland to Los Angeles. And though he spent much of his time locked in litigation, he never neglected his football team.
People say he spent a bulk of his time in courtrooms fighting Pete Rozelle. He was always on the field. And you could smell him when he came. He had this cologne. I don't know what it is. I still don't know. But the defensive line practiced all the way down on the far field. And as soon as he walked on the field, you could smell him. His knowledge and his presence was always apparent.
In 1982, Davis won the right to move.
We're just happy to be here. This is just the first step. We realized there'd be tremendous problems, the harassment, and we don't think the problems are at end.
But as crazy as life was for Davis, it was equally chaotic for his players. In '82, the Raiders practiced in Oakland and commuted to Los Angeles for home games. But the distractions off the field didn't seem to bother the players on it.
It wasn't a topic of conversation with us. We were a dysfunctional group that thought dysfunction was function. Does that make sense?
Somehow, it would make perfect sense for Al Davis and the new Los Angeles Raiders.
At running back, number 32, Marcus Allen.
A key member of the 1983 world champion Los Angeles Raiders was Marcus Allen, who was the third running back selected in the 1982 draft.
Oakland's first-round selection, running back, Marcus Allen of USC.
I thought that I would go earlier than 10, but I do remember one criticism in particular, which was sort of biting at the time. It was Paul McGuire.
The one thing about Marcus Allen, he's a 4.5 40 man. It's not extremely fast. He does fumble like crazy. Bud and I saw that during the course of last year. He fumbles the ball. I'll tell you right now, don't be surprised to see them move this guy to the outside and play him as a wide receiver.
I was like, what the hell is Paul talking about? I mean, and you know, it's a kind of ironic. We're really good friends now, but I couldn't stand him then.
Despite Paul McGuire's comments, Marcus Allen had few complaints in 1982.
It was fun being me. Come on, it was, 22 years old in Los Angeles. I just won the Heisman Trophy, got drafted by the Raiders, and was in home. Yeah, things were good. Things were fun.
You know, he was one of those guys that's easy to be envious of because he had it all. And I think what gets lost in the fact that he was so good looking and he was single and he drove the Testarossa and he had all the girls was the fact that this was a hard-working, tough SOB. And he was first and foremost a football player.
I just saw so many situations where Marcus took such a beating and just gets up and just keeps coming.
I'm not Jewish, but this particular word applied. He was a mensch. I mean, he was a man. This personifies a great athlete to me. You just have to say his first name. With Jordan, you say Michael, and everybody knows who you're talking about. You know, when you say Marcus, you knew you weren't talking about Dupree. You know, it was Marcus Allen.
One word was all that was needed for his name, but no words could adequately describe what he did on the field.
He could throw the football better than our quarterbacks. I was seeing something that I had really, quite frankly, had never seen before, up close and personal.
No one was more impressed with Marcus than Ted Hendricks.
things weren't going well. Came to the sidelines. Ted said, just give the ball to Marcus. And this was my rookie season. You know, and I've been watching Ted Hendricks since I was a kid. And for him to say that was huge. So I knew I had the confidence of my players, and especially a future Hall of Famer like Ted Hendricks.
Marcus was Rookie of the Year in '82. His 14 touchdowns made him the NFL's leading scorer, and he helped Los Angeles to an 8-1 record in the strike-shortened season. But the Raiders were upset in the playoffs.
I just remember that New York Jet game at home that we blew. We had every opportunity to win that game.
I think the grind of practicing in one city, playing in another city, took its toll, even though it was a strike-shortened year.
And I think a lot of us felt like that was a year that we probably should have been to the Super Bowl.
There's always been an argument about who's America's team. You know, a lot of people say the Cowboys, but I always thought the Raiders were.
Some saw the 1983 Raiders as America's team. Others as America's most wanted.
The Raiders are so rough. 2 weeks ago, they were penalized 15 yards right off the top for unnecessary roughness. And that was during the national anthem.
And trying to put a face on what that locker room was like. I remember I was watching the Bruce Willis movie Armageddon. They've got 5 days to save the planet. And in walks this group of misfits. You know, they get from strip bars and on the Harley, evading the police. And they walk into NASA, and the astronauts are looking at this group that's going to save the planet and said, this group has the right stuff. That's what I think people would look at when they walked into our locker room.
Al Davis was the owner who welcomed those misfits to the Raiders. And as Howie Long learned in practice one day, the Raiders' attitude emanated from their owner.
I think he said something like, yeah, 75, he's thinking pretty tough. Yeah, I'd have taken your lunch money. You know, something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, whose ass has he kicked? You know, but you know what? I always called him Mr. Davis and still do.
Neither Mr. Davis nor his players backed down from anyone.
You intimidate people. That's just the way it is. Some people certainly always push the envelope, but I always felt the game should be played that way. It wasn't a game for anybody who was soft.
Now, the one thing they'll do is take a swing at you. If you hit them good, they'll take a swing. There's 4 or 5 guys that are demented on that team, and you'll probably read about them. A couple of big, handsome guys that have got a mind about that big. You know, who they can be. I don't want to name them, but they'll come after me like they did Bob.
The most intimidating Raider was Lyle Alzado.
Lyle was a force, and a volatile force. He was a tortured soul. We jokingly called Lyle 3 Mile Lyle because he was like the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. You just weren't sure when he was going to blow.
He might have been the street smartest guy I've ever been around. His familiar phrase was that he was the toughest street fighter on the planet, and that if he and King Kong went into an alley, only one of us was coming out, and it wasn't the monkey.
I don't particularly think there's a person on this earth that can kick my ass.
Alzado once sparred with Muhammad Ali and wasn't knocked down. Although he didn't become a Raider until age 33, he made an immediate impact, especially on a young defensive end who, like Alzado, fostered a toughness that was the product of a troubled childhood.
The Raiders' basic philosophy on defense is to just out and out beat up the man in front of you.
Howie was, I always say he's one of the toughest white guys I've ever seen in my life, man.
Howie Long oozed confidence, but in reality, he was driven by his own insecurity.
You know, I'm not a shrink, and I really haven't sat down and talked to anybody about this, but I would say, you know, Dad leaves home, you know, raised in 3 different houses. Dad's homeless at one point. That kind of a background will lend to someone questioning the security of any situation. I could be a guy who would have 3-4 sacks in a game, and I would lay in bed and think about the one play that I got hooked on a sweep my way. I think it wasn't until I retired that I took a second and said, you know, I was pretty good.
If that's what worked for him, then God bless him. Never did understand that, because here you had this guy great-looking specimen. I mean, wow, what a body this guy had. I just know that in that point in time, he was an absolute monster, maybe the best defensive end in football.
In the first game of 1983, Long set the tone for the Raiders season. Along with number 77, Alzado.
During that year, the Raiders led the league in sacks, and if I'm not mistaken, knocked out 8 quarterbacks during the season. I'm not surprised at that. As the phrase goes, they arrived in a bad mood.
And they often arrived together.
We walked on the field together, we walked off the field together. If you fought one of us, you fought us all. It was kind of like your dad, and I say this to my boys, if I ever hear that somebody get after your brother and you were there and you didn't jump in, I'm gonna kick your ass.
In the home opener, they held Houston to 6 points, then destroyed the Dolphins on Monday Night Football in Week 3. The next week, they welcomed rookie John Elway to the NFL, knocking him out of the game and battering his backup Steve DeBerg. In the first month of the '83 season, the undefeated Los Angeles Raiders established themselves as a very good team with a very bad disposition. These misfits weren't being asked to save the planet, but they played like they were intent on ruling the planet.
When they're on, they're the best team in the league.
They were the defending champion Washington Redskins. In Week 5, they hosted the Raiders in one of the greatest regular season games in NFL history. This was Al Davis football. Throw it deep and let your speedsters outrun the opposition. Cliff Branch scored on a 99-yard reception, and Greg Pruitt ran a punt back 97 yards. But in this game of big plays, the smallest player on the field, the Redskins' Joe Washington, had the biggest impact. Washington sparked a Redskins comeback with a 67-yard gain on a screen pass and also scored the game-winning touchdown with seconds remaining.
The Heisman, 3 receivers to the far side. Throws it over the middle. Washington, touchdown! Joe Washington!
There were no moral victories, but we also understood that we had flown cross-country and had gone toe-to-toe with the world champions in a game that we should have won. Now, we were frustrated by the fact that we didn't win, but I don't think there was disappointment. I think that was one of the advantages of having a veteran team. You had people that understood that it was a marathon, and as Ted Hendricks once said to me, it's in the can. He said that once to me after we lost an overtime game to San Diego. He said, this game's in the can, it's over.
And linebacker Ted Hendricks was an expert when it came to cans or bottles.
Ted would come in on Monday morning hungover from the night before, or maybe kind of a continuation of the night before, and we would put up film. Charlie Sumner would put up film of the next week's opponent, and Ted would sit there half awake and call out the play they were going to run before they ran it. And as a young player, you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, how does he know all the answers? One time we were playing Miami and they sent someone in to crack back on Ted. And Ted is yelling at Don Shula on the sideline. Don, that's an insult. You can't run that play. I saw that in '71. Ted Hendricks was one of the smartest guys I've ever been around. In business, in television, in football.
And the number of times that he blocked kicks in crucial situations or just made huge plays, he could do that over and over again.
The ball snapped. Blocked! It's blocked to the middle. Raiders after the ball, and the ball game will be over.
In Week 6, Hendricks blocked the 25th kick of his Hall of Fame career to preserve a win over the Chiefs. But despite their 5-1 record, the Raiders' offense was struggling. And in Seattle in Week 7, they gave up 8 sacks and turned the ball over 8 times. Later, the mistake-prone Raiders lost to Seattle again and fell to 6-3. Over a 5-game stretch, they had committed 28 turnovers.
I don't know why that we had such a rash of turnovers. I certainly don't know why. I was one of the contributors to that. I don't know why I couldn't hold onto the ball my second year. It wasn't an easy year for me. It was funny because Greg Pruitt and I talked about the sophomore jinx.
In 1983, Marcus Allen averaged less than 4 yards per carry and had just one 100-yard rushing game in the regular season. He wasn't satisfied with his play or the Raiders' offensive philosophy.
The Raiders lined up in full, I, and far and ran 4 plays. How many times did the Raiders run 17 Bob Trejo? Everyone in the stadium knew it was coming. When they know what you're running, you better be real good at what you do.
The game plan was basic, but the men asked to execute it were complex characters with minds of their own.
I remember distinctly a game in the Coliseum against the Broncos. The coach sent a play in. I remember Henry Lawrence, the offensive tackle, says, F that. We're not running that play. Let's run this. And someone else says, yeah. And the reason I say that, and I know that this sounds terribly adolescent to people listening, but it was our field. It was our field. And so coaches could do what they want. They could create, that's fine. Give us a game plan on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Go ahead and provide all of that. But once the game started on Sunday, it was our field.
And on their field, some Raiders felt Marcus Allen should see more of the football.
At this point in time, we were trying to still spread the offense around, which really made no sense. You know, we had this great tailback. We might as well have used him.
I always wanted the ball because I always felt that I was the best player on the team. Any player that you talk to, any great player, wants the ball in their hands. And I wanted to win.
When Allen told Al Davis he wanted to run more, Davis explained how he could do that.
Yeah, he said something about take a few laps or something like that. Yeah, which I really didn't, I mean, I thought it was kind of funny.
There was nothing humorous about the relationship between Allen and Davis.
It was sort of strange because I was always referred to as the other guy. I used to, hear a lot of things that, he didn't like the fact that I was, I had a name for myself already before I even arrived with the team. It was not my fault. They moved to Los Angeles and everybody knew who I was, and I was a Heisman Trophy winner. We didn't have the best relationship, and I was playing for me and my teammates. At the end of the season, it was like, about time you did something, was sort of the conversation that we, would have. So it was not one that I would categorize as great or good or anything like that. It was just, what it was.
Ten games into the '83 season, the Raiders were 7-3. Their play on the field was spotty, and so was their fan support in the massive LA Coliseum, which had to disappoint Al Davis.
I know that he had visions of luxury boxes and a 93,000-seat stadium filled. One of the things that he was not prescient enough to see, however, is that Los Angeles is not a great sports town. It's a great entertainment town. And the teams that were successful down there, the Lakers and the Dodgers, were teams that were very cognizant of public relations, which had never been Al Davis's strong suit. Al Davis never sold the Raiders. He thought the Raiders sold themselves. And in Los Angeles, you absolutely had to do some marketing, and he was unwilling to do that.
Which might explain why Davis's team so often played in front of so many empty seats. The Raiders may not have appealed to the masses, but they did draw their share of celebrities.
James Garner was always around. Someone who really, really genuinely was a big fan.
Nicholas Sheridan used to be there all the time.
The Coliseum was a little more than half full in Week 11. Tom Flory's Raiders trailed the Broncos by 1 point with less than a minute remaining.
I run this out. Now, as I cut up the field, Dokie Williams is trying to make a block. The cornerback comes towards me. He hits him right in the back. And as I take up the sidelines, the official reaches for his flag. I ran straight out of bounds because I knew it was going to get called back.
By stopping the clock, Todd Christensen allowed the Raiders to move into position for a game-winning field goal attempt.
Tension abounds. Snap, spot, kick on the way. Good! Chris Barr from 40!
And I remember the next day when we're watching the films, Tom Flores sees that play when I run out of bounds, and Tom says, "Did you know that that was a penalty?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And he says, "Well, that was heads up."
Christensen's intelligence was evident in both his deeds and his words.
Two roads diverged into a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. That has made all the difference.
But how did a Mormon from BYU, who was the son of a professor of speech pathology, fit in with the Raiders?
Well, you know, Noah takes them all on the boat, you know. It's, we'll take two of them, and, you know, but we only got one of him. That was the thing.
After being cut by the Cowboys, Christensen had a tryout with the Raiders in 1979.
So Al Davis says to me, you know, we've been struggling lately. We haven't had the athletes we've had in the last couple of years. We need some young people to rebuild and play some special teams and be aggressive. And then he made reference to the greatness of the Raiders. Of course, I had to nod and say, "Oh, yes. You know, I've always been a Raiders fan." Yeah, sure I was.
He didn't catch a pass in his first 2 seasons with the Raiders, but eventually the man with the gift of gab developed a gift of grab.
He makes a one-handed catch. Magnificent.
On a scale of 1 to 10, his natural physical gifts were probably a 5. On a scale of 1 to 10, what he got out of his physical gifts, it would have to be a 9.5. Todd just willed the ball to come his way.
By 1983, Christensen had become the favorite target of both Jim Plunkett and any reporter looking for a quote. He embraced both the media and his teammates.
I don't think anybody had a problem with Todd. Obviously, you know, being very well-read, user big words, Todd also had the ability to come down to a locker room level and occasionally use locker room vernacular.
But it was the other vernacular he used that he looks back on now with some regret.
You see your name in the paper, you see your name in an article, you see your picture, and all of a sudden you get full of yourself. Being loquacious and being garrulous and feeling the need to get attention after 4 years of anonymity, unfortunately, forced me to say silly things like that. I'm afraid that that's the hubris of youth. That is not the definition of humility. I heard a much better definition of humility, which is doing your best and letting it largely speak for itself. That's painfully self-aggrandizing. Let me apologize for that some 22 years later. But what I was trying to convey was the idea that I did want the pressure. I did want the ball. That makes a lot more sense. All want not something to do with something to be.
Because that is the extension of my self-worth. Like Thoreau said, all want not something to do, but something to be. And I be a rock catcher.
I think I'm fitting in because I'm productive. In football, that's what matters. I had proven myself as a player. So all of the pseudo-intellectualism that everybody perceived as being pedantic or being put on, which clearly it wasn't, I don't think that was an issue at all. I think what it was is that at the end of the day, I was somebody who was competitive. I'm somebody that wanted to excel, and I know that I had an awful lot of friends on third down.
The one thing we all knew about Todd is that on Sundays, it was almost a guarantee that he was going to make, 2 or 3 tough catches a game, 2 or 3 meaningful catches a game. And yes, he may be a little different, but he could play. And that's all that I think most guys really cared about. He was one of the dominant tight ends in the league for a long, long time.
I think he's someone who should be considered as a Hall of Fame candidate down the road.
Many Raiders would say the same about their head coach, Tom Flores. the mild-mannered man in charge of the Misfits.
Tom was the perfect fit because he didn't react to Ted. You know, Ted Hendricks is someone who rode on the practice field in a white horse, and another time in camp sat one of those, you know, tables that you see at a Mexican restaurant with the umbrella and had a pitcher of margaritas.
People are always giving guys credit for their X's and O's, but being a head coach is just much more than that. It's managing people.
We got 30 minutes of Raider football, baby. 30 minutes of Raider football, and it's all ours.
I think ultimately the thing that really created closeness was that he trusted us.
All right? We know what has to be done, and we know how to do it.
Listen, I taught you all you need, you know, to know. Now go out there and play.
Number 46.
In the Super Bowl, in Super Bowl 18, you know, we're on the biggest stage. And I came over to Tom and I said, Tom, out and up, I can beat this guy. Ken Coffey can't cover me. Run the out and up. And here's the biggest stage. He's got his whole game plan down there, and he trusted me. He trusted me. He trusted that numbskull, pseudo-intellectual tight end to make the call. Now, the end of the story would be great, which is that I beat him on the out. I went like this. He got fooled. I caught a 50-yard touchdown pass. It was incomplete. It didn't work.
Christensen is the intended receiver. Nothing doing as Ken Coffey was back there with him.
But the fact that he trusted a player enough to be willing to make the call, how could that not endear you to a head coach as opposed to, you know, as opposed to the usual, get out of here. I'm in charge. Get out of the huddle. You know, there was never anything like that.
Perhaps Flores got along so well with his players because he had been one himself. He was the first starting quarterback in Raiders history. But playing for the Raiders was far easier than coaching the Raiders.
He had been with the organization for quite a long time, so he understood how it operated with Al Davis at the helm. Al Davis was larger than life, and of course you had a lot of players with a lot of personality. He knew that in a lot of cases the owner was going to take credit when things were going well. He also knew that he was going to be delegated blame when things didn't go well, and he was willing to accept that role.
The guy won 2 Super Bowls, and yet he's rarely mentioned, and I think it's a shame.
I can't emphasize this enough. I think that what he contributed as a head coach is understated.
In 1983, the skies over Los Angeles were guarded by cornerback Lester Hayes. In November, Al Davis traded for Mike Haynes, who played his first game for the 8-3 Raiders in Buffalo.
I think it was the greatest steal of all time, really. You know, Mike Haynes teamed with Lester Hayes. That was the combination that put us over the top.
It was like a dance with Mike. Mike was so gifted athletically that it was boring.
With Haynes taking away receivers, opposing quarterbacks were punished.
We could shut you down with our corners and get there with 4, which was really a unique concept in football.
Van McElroy once told me a story that they would get in the huddle and they'd call a cover 2 or a cover 3 where the free safety would help on his side of the field. And they would break the huddle and Haynes would turn to him and say, don't worry about it, I got it, do whatever you have to do.
Along with Howie Long and Ted Hendricks, Haynes became the 3rd future Hall of Famer to join the Raiders defense. And in December, there was talk of a current Hall of Famer joining the offense. Of course, the Raiders already had a running back who wore number 32.
Did I think it was a ploy by the Raiders? Yeah. I always thought they had something to do with just trying to, trying to control or to put me in a certain position. Yeah, I always felt like that's something they was a constructed effort to do.
But if any owner would consider signing a retired superstar, it would be Al Davis.
He called me up after I had been selected to the Hall of Fame, and he said, I know you're in great shape. And I'm thinking to myself, has he got cameras in the gym I'm working on? Does he know I'm playing hoops at the University of Virginia? At this point, I'm 40 years old. And he says, I want you to come back. He said, I just need 15 snaps. That's it, just rush the passer. He said, I'll give you a 3-year contract. He said, no Hall of Famer has ever come back. You'll shock the world. And honest to God, for what seemed like an eternity, but I'm sure it was just a millisecond, I thought to myself, And I said, you're crazy. You're out of your mind.
Jim Brown never became a Raider. And late in the '83 season, Marcus Allen started playing like a Hall of Famer himself.
Jensen in motion all the way across. Quick toss to Allen. Fakes left, comes back right, throwing deep. Christensen open, makes the catch at the 5. Touchdown, Raiders!
Allen and Todd Christensen, who led the NFL with 92 receptions, helped the Raiders win 6 of their last 7 games. They finished the regular season with a 12-4 record.
We were the best team in football, we felt, by a wide margin. We just felt we were that good. When we didn't play well, it's because we were bored.
Lyle Alzado was never boring. Prior to the playoff game against Pittsburgh, Alzado had convinced himself, or perhaps he'd had help from a teammate, that Steelers tackle Tunch Ilkin said, Alzado presents no problem.
If you get Chad Johnson mad, so what? You know, if you get, you get Donovan McNabb mad, okay. You know, if you get Lyle mad, you run the risk of bodily harm because he's unafraid of hurting you. In reality, it occurs to me that maybe Tunch Ilkin never said it at all, but how he manufactured it.
To quote Bill Pickel, I have no knowledge of the aforementioned incident. Did that sound like somebody from the Bowery Boys? He wasn't hard to rile up, though. He really wasn't.
Down back, looking right. Now he'll never look again. Not this time, as Alzado gets another sack after having left Tunch Ilkin in his dust, looking dejectedly hands on hip as if to say, what happened?
Bill, he is eating Tunch Ilkin's lunch today. Lyle Alzado, obviously ready for this matchup. He's beaten Ilkin to a pulp.
Alzado led a dominant defensive performance. Offensively, Marcus Allen took his play to new heights. Marcus scored twice and ran for 121 yards. The next week in the AFC Championship against the Seahawks, he remained unstoppable.
Go, Marcus, hang on to it, baby, all right.
His 216 yards from scrimmage helped the Raiders get their revenge on Seattle.
We had lost to Seattle twice. We took that as we'd gotten our ass kicked. And it was time for redemption.
You need one more score and put him away.
Work it back, steps up, gets a good block, loops one to the end zone to Allen. Touchdown Raiders! Super Bowl for the Los Angeles Raiders.
In front of an unusually large crowd of over 90,000 fans, the Misfits captured the AFC Championship.
I can still remember in the locker room, Tom Flory saying, "We're going to Tampa, baby." And everybody's, yes, yes, yes.
We're going to Tampa, baby. We're going to
The toughest part of any race is the last leg. And for some of the Raiders' star players, just getting to the Super Bowl proved to be more difficult than playing in it.
We took a cab to the Super Bowl, got stuck in traffic.
No, Otis McKinney and I, we didn't take the bus like most of the players do. We had a rental car.
We're a quarter mile at least from the stadium. Lyle starts yelling at the cab driver, "Get over, go up on the curb, damn it, blah, 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 blah."
And we pull up and we said, "Where do the players park?" And the lady said, "What? You guys, I don't care if you play or not, you guys need a parking pass."
And the cab driver, I don't know where he was from, and bless his heart, he's just frightened to death. Here's this guy in the front seat, looks like an armadillo with veins popping out of his neck.
And we say, "Excuse me, lady, we're playing in the game. We don't need a parking pass. You got to let us in." She says, "I'm sorry, you need a parking pass to get in."
Lyle gets out of the cab. He's walking. So now we got to get out of the cab because we go together.
And we just simultaneously looked at each other, and I guess we had the same thought. And we both grabbed our bags, and we took off running towards the locker room in that car. We left the car running right there, and to this day, we don't know what happened to her.
And we walked the last quarter mile to Super Bowl 18 through traffic and through the crowd.
It was just, I guess, proof that, you know, nothing was going to stop us.
There's the snap. It is blocked by Derek Jensen. Going into the end zone. Raiders after it. 3 men on it. Touchdown Raiders. Holy Toledo, what a start.
Revenge against the defending champion Redskins came easily. Seconds before halftime, Coach Charlie Sumner put Jack Squirick in and told him to shadow Joe Washington, who had burned the Raiders in Week 5 on a screen pass.
Looks off to the left, and he fires it up there. Intercepted! Jack Squirick! Touchdown Raiders! I don't believe it!
And they look like they knew it was coming. Man ran right for it. I guarantee they look like they knew that play was coming.
Let's keep dominating this team. Let's keep dominating.
In 1983, the Redskins set an NFL record for points in a season. In the Super Bowl, the Raiders shut them down and beat them up, sacking Joe Theismann 6 times and holding the Redskins to just 9 points.
I remember after the game, Joe Theismann saying, they handed us our asses on the tray, and the tray was bent. That was as much physical domination as I had seen defensively, and I got to witness it firsthand.
Todd Christensen also was an eyewitness to the brilliance of Marcus Allen. And late in the third quarter, he saw a play that he will never forget.
When I'm 95 and I'm hooked up to the wires on ESPN or whatever the station will be back then, you know, channel 1036 will show that replay, and I know that I'll be like this in my hospital bed because I never get tired of seeing that play.
That play was 17 Bob Trey-O.
Even now, whenever I see that highlight, I get tingles. I remember John Facenda saying, here comes Marcus Allen running with the night. Yeah, it's a good memory.
On came Marcus Allen, running with the night.
To make a run like that in a game like that at a time like that was just, it was pure magic. It was beautiful.
Crockett getting to Allen, sending him wide left. He has to reverse his field, but he gets away for a moment. Comes back up the middle of 30, 35, 40. Breaks past 2 men at the 50, down to the 40, picking up a blocker. Holy Toledo! Touchdown Raiders! 7-4.
It looked like a cluster, you know what, is what it did. Didn't it look like that way to you? Kind of the dysfunction function.
It was a symbolic play for football's dysfunctional family. Marcus appeared to be going nowhere, much like Al Davis when he attempted to move his franchise to Los Angeles. But in the end, no one could prevent football's evil empire, or Marcus, from reaching their desired destinations.
And Marcus can't run. Isn't that what they said when he came out? For Marcus, it was the confirmation of his greatness.
Holy Toledo! Marcus Allen has just claimed full title of All-World for 1983.
Coach, Tom Flores.
Yes, Mr. President.
I have already had a call from Moscow. They think that Marcus Allen is a new secret weapon, and they insist that we dismantle him.
That was a beautiful run, and it turned out to be a beautiful career. And yes, I did reverse field it sometimes, and yet I did, you know, avoid some tacklers. But in the end, I ended up where I wanted to end up.
The one thing that stands out to me is that after Marcus's 74-yard run, when you see everybody run out and embrace him, it's at that point in time when I think that the team realized that we were going to be world champions. The sheer delight, almost to a degree of frivolity, that's a picture that I think will linger for quite a while.
For players, the bond that's created is very hard to describe. There's some of these guys that I'm sure I'll run into 20 years later, but we will have a common bond that most people just will not understand. And it's a great sense of pride, a great sense of achievement. It is one of the more incredible feelings.
It was a feeling Lyle Alzado finally experienced after 13 NFL seasons with 3 teams.
Here I was at the beginning of my career, and here was a guy at the end of his career. I don't think I really fully understood at the time what he was going through and what it meant to him. Maybe seeing a side of Lyle that I had never seen, and I had seen the rainbow of emotions that came from him, but he was, for one of the few points in his life, I think he was at peace. When you're 23, I don't think you realize how great the moment really is and how rare it is. And there's nothing I wouldn't give short of my family, my children and my wife, to be back there trying to do it again.
I realized that this is the dream of millions, and yet I was living it out. My father had instructed me many years ago that there was only one sin, and that was the sin of ingratitude. And I didn't want to be one of those people that was ungrateful. I wanted to make sure that I thanked my Maker for the opportunity that I had to be in this game. That the son of a University of Oregon professor and a homemaker probably had no business being on this stage.
The celebration will begin as the Raiders sprint toward the clubhouse. And the great joy of watching Pete Rozelle present the championship trophy. Congratulations. To the Los Angeles Raiders.
Al, let me ask you something. With all the distractions that you have off the field, how are you able to keep focused on winning football games as you do and do throughout the years?
When you have great coaches, then after you have great coaches, you get great players. You have a great organization, and you tell them one thing: just win, baby.